In this section, I will explain how Biden's executive orders and policies aim to advance racial equity and combat systemic racism in the federal government and society. Racial equity is the condition where one's race does not determine one's life outcomes and everyone has a fair and just opportunity to thrive. Systemic racism is the historical and contemporary patterns of discrimination and oppression that create and maintain racial inequities in our society. Biden has made advancing racial equity and supporting underserved communities a top priority for his administration. He has signed 2 executive orders that provide a powerful and unprecedented mandate for all federal agencies to launch a whole-of-government approach to equity. The first executive order, signed on his first day in office, established an ambitious framework for agencies to assess how their policies and programs perpetuate barriers for underserved communities and develop strategies for removing those barriers. It also created an interagency working group on equitable data to improve the collection, analysis, and use of data to measure and advance equity. The second executive order, signed today, builds on the progress made by the first one and launches a new annual process to strengthen racial equity and support for underserved communities. It directs agencies to produce an annual public equity action plan that will include actions to address the barriers underserved communities may face in accessing and benefiting from the agency's policies, programs, and activities. It also empowers federal equity leaders, such as the chief diversity officers and equity officers, to coordinate and oversee the implementation of the equity agenda across the federal government. Biden's executive orders are complemented by his legislative agenda and budget proposals that aim to invest in underserved communities and promote racial justice. Some of the key initiatives include the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which provided $1.9 trillion in relief and recovery funds to help Americans cope with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The act included provisions that targeted assistance to communities of color and other groups that have been disproportionately affected by the health and economic crisis, such as expanding health care access, extending unemployment benefits, increasing nutrition assistance, supporting small businesses, funding tribal governments, and addressing health disparities. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which invested $1.2 trillion in rebuilding America's infrastructure and creating millions of good-paying jobs. The law included provisions that prioritized environmental justice, broadband access, clean energy, public transit, affordable housing, and workforce development for underserved communities. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which enacted comprehensive reforms to address police misconduct, excessive force, racial profiling, and accountability. The act included provisions that banned chokeholds and no-knock warrants, established a national registry of police misconduct, created grants for community-based alternatives to policing, and incentivized states to adopt best practices for law enforcement training and standards. The proposed Build Back Better Act, which would invest $1.75 trillion in expanding access to quality education, health care, child care, paid leave, elder care, and climate solutions. The act would include provisions that would benefit underserved communities, such as universal pre-K, free community college, lower prescription drug costs, expanded child tax credit, home care workers' rights, clean energy tax credits, and environmental justice grants. Biden's executive orders and policies demonstrate his commitment to advancing racial equity and combating systemic racism in the federal government and society. He believes that when we lift each other up, we are all lifted up.